Hello mga ka-senior. Today we're here at Rizal Park and we're joining a walking tour. It's called Bagumbayan to Rizal, a historical walking tour led by architect Paulo Alcazaren. So alamin natin ang istorya ng Bagumbayan na naging Rizal Park. So tara, let's go!
Welcome first of all to Rizal Park, which is under the National Parks Development Committee, which was established over the Parks Development Committee, was supposed to oversee the development and maintenance of a system of national parks, mostly urban parks, in the whole of the Philippines. Except that hindi natupad the original mission, and eventually, although they did manage for a time for Santiago, they still manage Paulo Park, and then they used to manage the electrical Quezon Memorial. Right? I never say elliptical circle because that is redundant. Elliptical is elliptical now. But that 25-hectare park is managed now by the LGU, and for a while the FDC also managed Burnham Park in Baguio. Here has been up to Baguio and St. Bernard Park. Pinangalan tayo ng start of pandemic. Anyway, please go in Baguio. There's a big park there. There's Burnham Park. That was part of FDC. Although today we are going to visit only two of the areas, which is the front area, which is originally was called Burnham Green Front in the Manila Bay, or what's left in the Manila Bay. And then we are in the central section where we have, of course, the Rizal Monument, as well as the Lagoon Fountain and Chinese Garden and Latin South, where the Rizal was shot, amongst other people. And then at the rear, Pastor Rosa, that road is the third portion of Rizal Park, although that area is now boarded up because it is being redeveloped by the National Museum, which now has jurisdiction in collaboration with the National Parks Development of that area. So we need to develop that as an extension of the National Park Complex. Who here has not gone to the National Museum? You all have gone to the National Museum? Okay, very good. So in any case, you know we're in Rizal Park. It is 1,150 meters from the start to the end, and it's about 450 meters wide. Okay, those measurements are important because this is the area when Manila was developing in the 17th and 18th century. In the 16th century, there were settlements outside of Intramuros. Everybody knows where Intramuros is, right? It's over there. So the whole city was where most of the Spaniards lived. But outside, there were, at the start, 5 towns surrounding suburbs, 5 towns or more arrabales. You had, of course, Malate, this is here. Ermita, which is right next to us, and this used to be a town called Bagumbayan. So Bagumbayan is this area from the walls to over here. This is the town, and there is reason why we don't have Bagumbayan anymore is when the British invaded the Philippines in 1670, they were able to conquer the capital because of the town here. Nakapasok yung British Army all the way to the edge because they were protected by the buildings in Bagumbayan. So it was a complete town with residential buildings, the church, the hospital. If you dig under the existing lagoon, you will find the ruins of foundations of the buildings that were built there in the 16th century. So what happened when the British finally came back Manila to the authorities? Clear yung area na to so that it would avoid any future invasions. So that's why we have all of this empty area that was here from the 18th and 19th centuries and 20th centuries. So what happened after that in the 1800s is that this is an open area, and since it was open, and if you see Ross Boulevard, that is the line of the sea. So there was no reclamation before. So the beach was actually here. Right? And since there's a wonderful view, the people from inside Intramuros will come out in the evenings for their evening paseo. And they would come out, I don't know if you can see it, but the edge, the corner of the Intramuros was where they would come out. There was a boulevard which in French is a lunette, right? So that's where the word luneta comes from, because this paseo where they would go and enjoy the views of the sunset late in the afternoon was called Paseo de la Luneta. So that's where the name Luneta came from, which most of us know Rizal Park. Forget it. We're walking.
Ang daming participant ng walking tour na to. Pero masaya. I'm sure. Well, I'm happy that itong mga estudyante kasabay natin are very much interested about the history of Bagumbayan and Rizal Park. So maganda yan. At least hindi lang sila nagti-TikTok at nag-Instagram, but they're interested sila sa history. May Rizal Fountain pala. First time ko malaman na may Rizal Fountain pala.
TikTok ba?
Yes, TikTok yan.
Kayo makakasama sa TikTok.
Sa Rizal Fountain.
Can everyone hear me? Yes. Yes. But it's possible. Anyway, at that corner, beyond the trees, is the Baluarte de San Diego, where people would access the promenade through a crescent-shaped baluarte called the Media Luna. So that's what the French called the lunette. So that's the etymology or the origin of the word luneta. And then when they came down, and this was the beach, there was a hippodrome-shaped or flattened oval loop called a paseo. And this is where people would make paseo to enjoy the sunset and the fresh air. And that paseo, although it was named Paseo de Alfonso, yeah. Okay na lang. Thank you very much. So we stand at the southern end of that original loop, and in that loop you could only go clockwise, while the Archbishop is the only one, and the Governor General could go counterclockwise in their carriages. So it was a place where people went to see and be seen and to enjoy the outdoors. So when Rizal Park was developed in the 1960s, after the MPDC set up, the people of Germany, the town of Wilhelmsfield, where Rizal lived while a student of the University of Heidelberg, donated this fountain. So supposedly this is the same fountain that Rizal drink from. So one by one you can. Hindi yata nagbayad na. MW business. Hindi yan water closet. Ano yan? Fountain. So they brought this from Germany, and this became the landmark of this site. But 30 years before, 50 years before, this whole area, right after the Rizal Monument was built, became the site of an annual event, which is usually every January, February. About this time, Manila would have a grand carnival, and that carnival lasted several weeks. That was yung pinakaintay na event in Manila. There was no shopping malls. There were no sports events. So the Manila Carnival was all of this area where you had pavilions from all over the country showing all of their products. There were pavilions from overseas. There were a lot of booths. There was the introduction of new technologies were through the Manila Carnival. Okay, so Valentine's na pala. Sige,
That's the Rizal namamasyal sa Luneta na walang pera.
Hindi nila mag-gets yung...
Hindi nila alam yung kanta na yan.
Alam niyo ba yan? Yung kanta ni Rico J. Boss, kantahin mo nga.
Namamasyal pa sa Luneta na walang pera.
Palakpakan natin!
Hey! Di ba ka-relate?
Okay, anyway. So, in 1898, what happened? The Americans took over the Spanish, right? And so they found Manila medyo hindi nasa kondisyon na maganda. So ang sabi nila, Manila had to level up. So what they did was to retain the services of a noted planner. Can anybody tell me the name to come and design Manila for them?
Burnham?
Daniel Burnham, very good guess, but unfortunately, the first planner that they approached was not Daniel Burnham, but a fellow named Frederick Law Olmsted. So Frederick Law Olmsted was the designer of Central Park in the US, but he was also a planner of cities. But by the time that this was 1898, 1899, 1900, medyo matanda na siya. He was not able to come here. His son was not able to come here either because they were busy designing other things. So they sent somebody else, and that is Daniel Burnham. So Daniel Burnham came over in 1904 and saw that this was all empty. And the dimensions of this area, like I said, was an Andrea. What was the dimensions? 450 meters or 500 meters wide and 1.2 kilometers. Just enough space to create the civic center or the national capital of the Philippines. So the original capital complex for the new possession of the Philippines was modeled after Washington, D.C. So Washington, D.C. was planned by Daniel Burnham. And the plan for Washington, D.C. that you see today is the result of the plan. Of course, there was an older plan, but Daniel Burnham and a couple of other guys redesigned Washington, D.C. in 1901. And in 1904, they applied almost the same template. So if you go to Washington, D.C. on your next summer vacation, if there were parents, please send me to Washington, D.C. Because Paulo Alcazaren told me I have to go there. Sabihin niyo sa kanila. So, wala pa atang Cebu pa, pero pwede na siguro. Anyway, Washington, D.C. was the same, almost the same width, right? But of course, it was longer. And in Washington, D.C., there was supposed to be, they have the capital there, and it was fronting the River Potomac. In Manila's situation, the same width, but one-third the length. We were also supposed to have a national capitol building. And William Parsons, who was the architect assigned by Daniel Burnham, to flesh out the design, actually created the design for a national capital, which is a miniature version of the one in Washington, D.C. And he designed it in the 1910s, and it was supposed to be there. Because this, for those of you who are in architecture planning and landscape architecture, is an example of formal Baroque planning. You have very formal spaces which are organized around a central axis. So that central axis in Washington, D.C. is the national capital on top of the hill and all the way down to the Washington Monument, yung mataas na obelisk, right? So, Daniel Burnham and William Parsons applied the same principles. We were supposed to build a national capital over there, and they did the design. If we had built the design in 1910, it would have only cost 10 million pesos, right? Mura. Pwede mong i-Gcash yan ngayon. Pero they ran out of money, they were not able to build it. So they focused instead on what? The other side, which is the terminus, the monument. Now, our monument was supposed to be a much larger monument than this. So in 1905, there was a competition, which is an international competition to design the monument, right? There were 40 entries from all over the world. Eventually, an Italian sculptor won the prize, but this is not his work.
Nandito tayo sa Luneta. We're participating on a walking tour by architect Paulo Alcazaren. So dami nating learnings ngayon, dami nating natutunan. Pero ang init.
As a central park, it was meant as a civic center. So all of the buildings of government would have been on either side, and at the back of the Capitol that Burnham and Parsons designed were supposed to be 5 buildings of the major departments of the government: agriculture, finance, national defense, natural resources. I forget what the other one because I'm senior now. Anyway, only 2 of those buildings were built. The Agrifina, what we know as Agrifina, is agriculture and finance buildings, which eventually became now it was the National Museum and the Department of Tourism. Of course, now the tourism left, and that's now all National Museum. 61 was supposed to be the centennial of Rizal's birth, and they were looking at modernizing the Rizal Monument, right? So there was another competition, and the one who won which was one of Phil, created a pylon. So ito yung Rizal, no? At I'm sorry because we don't have the image. They put a steel and aluminum tower over it to modernize it. And for those of you young enough to remember, a lot of people got mad and they said that is compromising the original structure. So overnight it was taken off, and that structure for about 2 decades was the landmark between Manila and Pasay City until about the 1970s, I'm sorry, way before your time. So that's why you have that. So a lot of people think that was the damage from World War II. It's not. It's really from the damage of ill-advised modernism. So yung library na yan, yung National Museum, was the National Museum on P. Burgos was originally designed as a national library. Juan Arellano and Tomas Mapua retrofitted it to become the legislature, and it was the Philippine Congress all throughout the pre-war and post-war period until we moved to Batasang Pambansa, which is another walking tour, but we will die if we take that walking tour because it's so big. Anyway, so hindi natupad yung original plan ni Daniel Burnham, hindi rin natupad yung sa Quezon City. That is why today, Philippines has no central place to go to. We don't have a central place, unlike Washington DC and other countries in the world, where you could go in one stop to all of the departments. So what the Philippine government is doing to us, if we want to express our displeasure with them, is we have to spend a lot of money to go to Batasang Pambansa in Quezon City, lose 2 hours to go to GSIS, that's where the Senate is, and then try to get to Malacanang, which is the executive. So split into 3 different areas. They don't want to talk to each other. They don't want us to reach them. And that is why, in my opinion, the Philippine government has failed. Please quote me. Independence Day. When is our Independence Day? What? Yes, what date? June 12th. But that flag was put up there to commemorate our second Independence Day.
July 4th.
Yeah, in our second independence in 1946, we were given independence by the United States on July 4th, which is their third Independence Day also, 1946, that spot. So there on the spot where you see the national flagpole was a big grandstand, very ornate. It's one of the last works of the famous architect Juan Arellano. It was a very ornate stadium, grandstand, facing the sea. Behind was the national monument, and this is where they had 2 flagpoles. They had 2 flags. When the American flag was lowered, then it was exchanged with the Philippine flag, and we had independence until Macapagal changed the Independence Day to June 12, and then we switched to a more nationalistic date. But that point is also kilometer 0, the point at which every other place in the Philippines is measured. So yan ang 0. That's why you see on the way out of Manila yung mga mohon na 20 kilometers, 100 kilometers, that is all referenced to that point. So yan, that's where you drop the pin. Okay? So we will give you 10 minutes, do your TikTok in front of Dr. Jose Rizal, and we will see you hopefully alive on the other side. Thank you. Go, go.
So, patawid naman tayo sa may kabilang side. Kaya. Philippine flag.
Bata-bata na lang pa mga kuya na ito.
Naalala ko yung mga kalabaw na yun ng bata ako. So, papasok tayo sa dito sa park. Papasok tayo sa park na ay papasukan ng tao. So first time na lang inalaw na pasukin ng park. Totoo.
Okay. Okay, please unmute. Okay, we are in the 16-hectare front 1/3 of the Rizal Park. This is what originally was called Burnham Green, and it was named Burnham Green in 1912 when Daniel Burnham died. So the first big flagpole was not our Philippine flag because we were under the United States. The first big flagpole was here where the Masonic monument was a tall memorial flagpole to Daniel Burnham, which was lost during the war. So, why do we have an area of reclamation here? In Burnham's plan, he had suggested that this is the civic center, but it was to connect by a Cavite coastal road from here 25 kilometers to anyone? Where the Navy was.
Sandy Point.
Sandy Point, thank you very much. You don't win a prize because I didn't say there was a prize. May prize tayo sa trivia.
Sayang.
Oh, okay.
So I won a prize.
Next question na lang. Sorry. So Sangley Point, because the Sangleys, which is in Chinese that means merchants, used to drop anchor there dahil malalim yung tubig doon. That's why the US Navy also made it their station. But during the galleon trade, the galleons would dock there. So all of the wealth would come from here and take a carriage all the way to Sangley Point. So, in the American plan, Burnham suggested a coastal road that is about 100 meters wide from here all the way to Sangley, right? That is now known as Rojas Boulevard and the coastal road. Until now, hindi pa natutupad yung original intention to connect Sangley and Manila. Although it's almost done, I understand that they will also extend the LRT. So it took over 100 years for the Burnham plan to be implemented, which is the lesson learned for all of you who's going into planning. The master plans in the Philippines take over 100 years to fulfill, if ever. So yan ang challenge ng mga bata. Please make sure that the plans that you make, kasi matatanda na kami, will see the light of day. In any case, so the first section of the Rojas Boulevard was completed before World War II, and they reclaimed this because what happened? Why did they reclaim this area? So yan yung Rojas Boulevard, no? Yung reclamation nito is because of the fact at the turn of the century, the South Harbor, that's over there behind the Manila Hotel, the South Harbor was being constructed to allow for more modern ships to dock and for freight and the exchange of goods. Before that, all of the goods that were brought in from overseas, they docked in the bay and they would offload all of the goods to lifeboats called cascos, and the cascos would then go to Pasig River and unload their goods in the docks. They're called the muelles. So we have the muelle de Industria, muelle de Banco Nacional, before the piers, before the harbors with the muelles. But it was not deep enough for the very large ships. So they decided to construct the South Harbor. So when Burnham, habang story yan, no? Pati ako napapagod. Anyway, nung dumating si Daniel Burnham, nakita niya, nakatayo siya dyan sa bandang Rizal Monument, although the monument was not there yet. It was only completed in December of 2013. He saw that the view of the bay was compromised. So he said, we must reclaim this area 1,000 feet, 300 meters forward, and this was going to be where he would move the original Paseo de la Luneta to the front over there, which is behind the Quirino Grandstand. So until the 1960s, there was a replica of the original Paseo over there, and that was called the New Luneta, while this was called the Old Luneta. Okay? So this open area, of course, became an events place. This is where a lot of religious celebrations and gatherings were conducted. First of which was the 1937 Eucharistic Congress, and eventually, after the war, several visits of the various popes. That's why you have, is that Pedro Calungsod? Lorenzo Ruiz. Halata, hindi ako nagsisimba. Anyway, that's the Manila Hotel. Okay? So what the Americans needed to entice investors in the Philippines is a good place to stay, because they had very few hotels in old Manila, turn of the century. So they commissioned William Parsons to design the Manila Hotel, which is what you see. The lower structures was completed in 1912, and it was the most modern hotel in Southeast Asia. So it was one of the first hotels to have telephones. It was one of the first hotels to have elevators. And they did not have air conditioning, although they had cooling fans. And the top floor was open. So the top floor was open. First trivia question, why was the top floor of the Old Manila Hotel open? Can anyone guess? It has to do with the fact of the South Harbor there. Sirit na? It was open because they would wait for the ships to come in, and you could see the ships, the big cruisers. Wala pang aeroplano noon. So all of the visitors would come in by ship, and they would dock. And once you dock, it would take only 15-20 minutes from getting from your ship to getting into your room. Even before the Manila Hotel was constructed, the Americans, being a culture that is very steep in racial and economic bias for the rich, needed two buildings. A club for the exclusive use of American officers and only white officers, and another club for the exclusive use of white American businessmen. So that's the Army Navy Club over there. You can't see it anymore, but it's there. And the Elks Club, which became the Museo ng Pambatang Pilipino. Okay. But for the longest time, the Army Navy and the Elks Club were the exclusive clubs. Yan yung parang corps nila doon, where only white military personnel could go in and be served. Not even their wives. Their wives, I think, would be only allowed certain days. So white male military and then white male businessmen. It was only after the war when they allowed Filipinos to become members. Would hold the Independence Day celebrations every year in that site, in the original site. Pero nahirapan sila because magtatayo sila ng temporary grandstand tapos gigabihin ulit. So eventually they commissioned this grandstand, which is designed by Antonio Toledo, the famous architect, who became the chief architect of the Bureau of Public Works, or eventually what we now know as the Department of Public Works and Highways, DPWH.
We are entering the Rizal execution site. Papasok tayo dito. Tayo sa beach. Dami.
Susod ka pa.
Dito dating light and sound show.
Monument as a place where you had evening strolls, but it was also in the late 19th century the site of execution for those who opposed the regime of the Spanish, right? And were executed by two general methods. Meron pa bang hat? Okay, can anyone tell me what those two methods of
Firing squad.
were? Anyone? Yes?
Firing squad and garrote.
Yes?
Firing squad and garrote.
You have to explain to the young children what garrote is.
Then the neck and then you'll be
Yes,
twisted.
to suffocate by clamping the throat. So the winner is, what's your name, sir?
Joseph Bautista.
Joseph Bautista gets the hat.
Thank you.
So, meron pa ba? Para mag-umpis na. So, who are the three famous people who died by garrote? Wait for the next. So, where you are in the back, that's about the start of the shoreline. Doon sila nag-ano. That's the sea. So that was the beach, and there was coral and fish in the old days. But this is where he was shot, and several dozens of others were shot all along from the side of the walls, from the Maricon all the way to the other end. So the reason why the national monument was put where it is today, Augustela, one is because it's the design of the planner Daniel Vernon. That was the central axis, no? So the central axis. So it is a design affectation na nilagay yung monumento sa axis, even though historically this is where he was found. So that's why we have the monument. Of course, as I told you, it's not as tall as it should have been, and the building at the end was never completed. So in the 1960s, they decided to celebrate this site, or to sanctify the site by creating this section, which is walled off by the berm. If you see at the back, this was designed by Ivy Santos, and the problem was the traffic noise. So to mitigate the traffic noise, you see at the back, it is a mound. It's called a berm. For those of you taking landscape architecture, sometimes that is written in the board exams, but I will not confirm or deny that. Okay. So that berm is the one that mitigates and also camouflages the traffic at the back. So the central focal point is this piece, is this vignette of the actual Martin Rizal that was created by Eduardo Castillo, who was a sculptor that Ivy Santos worked with. Is very common. And you can see Rizal facing. Originally, of course, he was facing the firing squad, but at the last moment, because he's a drama queen, he turned around and faced the sea.
The monument where Dom Bursa was executed, Gomez Burgos Zamora, on February 17, 1872. So dito pinatayan na Dom Bursa because of the Cavite Mutiny. So our next stop is the Chinese Garden. So papasok tayo dito. Mukhang maraming kwento about the Chinese Garden. Chinese Garden. We're inside the Chinese Garden. Hello. Hello. Ano? May mga activity din pala dito. May mga pagoda.
Under the administration of Roy Valencia and implemented between 1965 and 1970. So the Chinese Garden was the first, and they got a donation from the Republic of Taiwan, who sent over a noted Chinese landscape designer, C.Y. Shi, and together with the local landscape architect here, Ern Vicencio, they constructed this Chinese garden using traditional methods of construction of the walkways in the pavilion, as well as the construction of the pond. So this was the first. It was supposed to be followed, and we will look at it a little later, followed by the Japanese garden. There was supposed to be a Malaysian garden and an Indonesian garden, but by that time, in the late 70s, there was a lack of funds.
Sa Japanese Garden naman tayo.
Was by Leandro Roxin, Lindy Roxin, National Artist for Architecture, along with the collaboration of I.P. Santos himself, also a national artist, and he's a landscape architect. So the original amphitheater was open air, and over the years nilagyan ng walk, and they have expanded it. But behind the amphitheater is another landmark building, which is the planetarium, designed by Federico Illustre, also in the 1960s. So that's one of the last buildings that Federico Illustre designed. Beside the amphitheater is the chess plaza. Because in the 1970s, naging uso talaga yung chess. So Eugene Torre became the grandmaster, the first grandmaster of Asia. And we held a lot of chess tournaments in the Philippines in the 1970s. So we built a chess plaza. So this Japanese garden, again, which was a donation of the Japanese embassy, it was built also in the late 1960s, and it's still open, as you can see. But the base of this, the original base of the Japanese garden, is the foundation of what was supposed to be the National Museum. So in the 1950s, Rizal Park, before it became Rizal Park, was supposed to contain the Rizal Memorial Complex. Not the sports complex, but the complex of a national theater, a national library, and national museum designed by Filipino architects of the day under the name Hexagon Architects. So they designed three structures, of which only one, the National Library, was built. The museum was never built. The foundation is still there underneath. And the third building was supposed to be a very modern theater designed by Juan Nactil. It was never constructed. The deadline was supposed to be June 19, 1991. Pero itong Shangri-La sa kanto ng Ayala at Makati Avenue used to be the site of a very nice-looking theater called the Rizal Theater. And that design originated here. Hindi ginawa, so transfer ni na-fill to the site in Quezon City, in Makati. Okay? So the Rizal Memorial Complex was never built, and so what they did was to build on the foundation of the unbuilt National Museum. Nakaangkel ng konti, that is the flower. That is the flower clock, the Rizal Park flower clock. Of course, you have to go up in the drone to see it, but that is a clock. Originally, the clock was a donation of the Rado company in the 1960s, and a few years ago, 10 years ago, it was revived by Hyundai. So I don't know what it is now, but it is still a functioning clock. You can go there, and that's one of the world's largest flower clocks. So that's one of the icons of and landmarks of Rizal Park. And in front of it, there's a new contemporary installation of lights by I don't know who. And then across from it, if you look, because we cannot go, you see the LRT? Okay, at the base of the LRT is the relief map of the Philippines. Unfortunately, all of this area is now closed because of the construction of the extension of the National Museum. So there was a relief map of the Philippines. You can go up to a view deck and look and see look at the geomorphology or the shape of all of the 7,000 plus islands of the Philippines. So I have no idea whether they will keep the relief map, but the relief map was a project by one of the scientists from the University of the Philippines, as well as the landscape architect Vicencio in the early 1970s. But in front of that, the two buildings, you see the building of Architect Tom Galicia with the very iconic dome now. That used to be the Department of Tourism, but that also used to be one of the Agripina buildings. So the neoclassic buildings that were designed and built before the war, it suffered heavy damage because the Japanese were holed out there, and they rebuilt it using money donated by the United States. So the two buildings, the agriculture and finance, were reconstructed, and it was used as government offices of the legislature and the departments until the 1970s, when they were moved to Batasan, Pambansa, and other sites. So those two buildings are today the National Museum, but in front of all of that was a rotonda, now called the Doroy Valencia Circle in memory of Doroy Valencia, but it also used to have an iconic sculpture, which was the world, a globe. So yung globe sa harap ng MOA, sa Mall of Asia, that's not the first globe. The original globe was here. And around the globe was a very popular skating rink, the rollerblades. No? So until the 1980s, you could rollerblade around the globe. Okay? Waterworks pump station. And in the 1960s, the iconic element there was a very tall waterfall. Actually, the waterfalls is still there, but they don't have enough money to keep it running. And it used to be in the postcards that people would sell and send about the Luneta. In fact, the Luneta was one of the most popular subjects of Philippine postcards in the 1960s and 70s. If you don't know what postcards are, please ask your fathers or your grandfathers and grandmothers. So we are now going to go across the other side. You see the pigeon housing. That's where we're going. Okay, thank you very much. Let's go to the other side.
Okay, lugar to. First time ko makapasok yata dito.
Oh my God, ito.
One famous cafe which was run by the deaf and the dumb. So the Philippine Society for the Dumb and Deaf, all of those people, you had to use sign language to order, and the famous snack was their hot dogs, which was very good. That's the only place you could get very good hot dogs. Unfortunately, in the late 1970s, it disappeared. Now, there was another important element to the 1960s, which was the garden for the blind. So, designed by I.P. Santos, the small garden, which is about 500 square meters, was designed by him, fully enclosed, and the selection of the plant materials as well as the textures of the seating and the railing were chosen by I.P. Santos to be able to give the blind a full experience for smells of flowers and plants, for the textures, of the leads for the paving underfoot. So it was a very well received element that completed the inclusiveness of the Rizal Park in the 1960s and 70s, way before other public parks all around the world were open to the PWD. Unfortunately, what happened to it? It has disappeared and is now replaced by chicken joy. So, yes, we want to start a movement to rebuild the park for the blind. Unfortunately, the franchise of the lease of Jollibee is still for a couple of years. So instead of a park for the blind, we have chicken joy. So that completes our tour of Rizal Park, and I'd like to thank all of you in behalf of the NCCA and the UAP and all the organizers for coming this afternoon and sharing your time with us. I'm Paulo Alcazaren. Thank you very much, all of you.
Walang senior citizen garden dito sa Luneta. Senior citizen garden. Tayo. Order tayo. Luluto na. May hatos kaya ate?
Ganito yung binabaril tapos lumalabas yung lobo.
Tayo ngayon sa Luneta. Okay. Kung natubusin ko, ang laki lang. ₱55, panalo. Hello again, katatapos lang ng ating walking tour with architect Paulo Alcazaren. It's been another very interesting day for us because ang dami nating natutunan dito sa Bagumbayan to Rizal Historical and Heritage Walking Tour na inorganize ng National Commission for Culture and Arts, NCAA, NCCA, and then ang dami palang nababalot na istorya dito sa Luneta. Nalaman natin na ito palang Luneta used to be an old town called Bagumbayan, and it was converted into a park during the American time. So nalaman din natin kung ano mga nangyari sa bantay ni Rizal. Hindi pala siya yung nanalong design but second place dahil hindi lang nagkaroon lang na problema yung original design. Then nalaman din natin na during the 60s, during the Rizal Centennial, naglagay ng pylon doon sa monumento ng Rizal, kaya tinasya kami mga butas pala doon sa taas. It was designed by Nakpil. Ang dami pang istorya, nalaman natin ang mga reclamation projects na ginawa, na ang shoreline used to be in front of the Rizal Park, and then the portion after that, kung nasa ng Grandstand, nasa ng Manila Hotel, were all reclamation projects to create a port para sa pagdating ng mga ships sa Pilipinas. And we also learned that Ross Boulevard was originally planned as a highway extending all the way to Cavite City to Sangli Point. So ang dami pa. I guess hopefully we'll be able to research more about this Rizal Park and Bagumbayan. And then thank you very much pala. Nanalo din tayo sa raffle. Siguro Ani, ano nakalagay? Ani na sining dahil nasagot natin ng tanong tungkol sa anong klaseng kamatayan ang ginagawa sa mga during the Spanish time, ang firing squad at ang garote. With that, I'd like to thank you very much for joining me in this another fun adventure dito sa Rizal Park. It's been another rewarding walking tour, at nagpapasalamat tayo sa NCAA for organizing such a very wonderful experience para sa lahat. Hindi lang sa ating kundi sa maraming mga estudyante na nag-join ng walking tour. Ito sa inyo. So thank you very much for watching. Travel while you can. Until our next vlog. See you soon.